Hello and welcome to today's video about comparing fractions. This is a review lesson. First, let's talk about a key vocabulary term that you will need to know and understand for today's lesson. Quick common denominator. This is the product of the denominators of two or more fractions. For example, the quick common denominator of 3/4 and 5/6 is 4 times 6 equals 24. In general, the quick common denominator of A over B and C over D is the same thing as B times D. As the name suggests, this is a quick way to get a common denominator for a collection of fractions, but it does not necessarily give the least common denominator. Now, let's talk briefly about renaming fractions as equivalent fractions. If I asked you to rename these two fractions as equivalent fractions, there are a number of different things you could do. You could use a multiplication table, you could look up fractions in the table of equivalent fractions, decimals, and percents, which is in the SRB on page 401, or you could use the multiplication rule. Remember that multiplying the numerator and denominator of a fraction by the same non-zero number yields an equivalent fraction. This looks like this. 1/4 times 3 on both the top and the bottom is equal to 3/12, which is an equivalent fraction for 1/4. If we want to work with the fraction 2/3, and we want to multiply the top and the bottom by, let's say, 4, this is going to equal 8/12, which is also an equivalent fraction for 2/3. As I just stated, this is called the multiplication rule because we used multiplication with each one of these two fractions to find an equivalent fraction. Another thing you could do is use the division rule. Dividing the numerator and denominator of a fraction by the same non-zero number yields an equivalent fraction. An example of this exists with the fraction 12/15. We can divide both the top and the bottom by 3 because that's the only common factor that they both have, and we will come up with 4/5, and that is an equivalent fraction for 12/15. Now let's move our review on to comparing fractions using common denominators. In this situation, we are going to compare the two fractions 2/3 and 3/5. We want to know which one is bigger and which one is smaller. In order to do this, we are going to find a common denominator and rename the fractions using the quick common denominator method, which also includes using the multiplication rule, which we learned about in Unit 6. The quick common denominator is the product of the denominators you are renaming. In this case, it will look like this. Because our denominators are 3 and 5, we are simply going to multiply each of the two fractions by the denominator of the opposite fraction. Looks like this. 2/3 is going to be multiplied top and bottom times 5, because that's the denominator in this fraction. And 3/5 is going to be multiplied top and bottom by 3, because that is the denominator in this fraction over here. When we do this, we get 10/15 is the same thing as 2/3, and we get 9/15 for 3/5. We can see pretty quickly and easily that since 10 right here is bigger than 9, which is right here, 2/3 is the bigger fraction of the two. So 2/3 is greater than 3/5. Here are your practice problems of the day. First, compare these two fractions. Write a greater than, less than, or equal to symbol in between them in your notebook. You are comparing the fractions 4/7 and 5/6. Second, insert a symbol in this space right here to tell whether 2/3 plus 2/6 is greater than, less than, or equal to 1. Good luck!